Hello DIY friends, in this video I will show you the complete process of how I designed and built this Bluetooth speaker. As with every project, there are multiple challenges on the table. I intend to make the speaker look more like a design object that you can display on a cabinet. I do not want to show a physical power button, I need to build my own mesh for this to be unique, and all electrical components must be accessible for repairs. For this build we only need 6 components, the links are in the description. For my design I selected these tiny full range drivers. Though only 70mm in diameter, they deliver a rich sound and a punchy bass. To power the drivers, I decided to stick to this audio unit from Tech, which delivers plenty of power and has a built-in Bluetooth receiver. And to keep this unit cool at all times, I'm using this 10mm thermal pad. As an energy source, I picked this Aftertech battery pack that is already equipped with a DC connector, and it can deliver the right voltage for my setup. This pack also has a built-in battery management system, so I don't have to worry about safety. When selecting this proximity switch, I made sure to check that the maximum load of the battery would not exceed the limits of the switch and that the operating voltage is the same as the rest of the system. It already had DC connectors, which made my life a lot easier. And then lastly, there is this off-the-shelf DC connector that I will use as the charging port. For the design, I got inspired by gemstones, as the multitude of facets deliver an interesting reflection. For the mesh, I took reference to old cars with these prominent grills. As for the colors, I don't know why, but there's something about black and gold that gives me a good feeling when I see it. Once I captured the design idea on paper, I translated this into the computer to see if it looks as good as I envisioned it. By adding rough shapes of all the components into the 3D data, I was able to check if all would fit the design. For those of you who love to build your own speaker, I've added a link to the 2D drawing in the description. The only thing I'd like in return is a like and subscribe. To build the housing, I first calibrated my track saw angle. Then I made a single long strip, as this ensures all parts of the housing have the exact same width. Now I only had to cut them to length using the miter saw. For this housing I used black MDF, because once you go black MDF, with an edge trimmer I milled out the groove for the dividing wall. I used a track saw to clean up the edges and to perfectly align all openings. So far so good, until I wanted to make the chamfer on the outside of the planks using a router bit with a guiding wheel. But the angles on the planks created an opening, so I messed this up. After cutting away a couple of millimeters, I used the guiding rail to correct the issue with a second pass of the router. Then I flipped all the planks over to cut away the recess for the driver mounting plates. First I cut the end dimension and then I forgot to securely clamp the planks to the workbench. This means the router could pull out the planks to leave me in tears once more. Once I clamped them firmly to the bench, like somebody who actually knows what he's doing, I was able to fix the issue that I created. I also had to repair the damaged plank, because making a new one would surely result in a different width. Then I also noticed that my eyes lied to me about a dimension that I saw. So I had to make another groove for the dividing wall altogether. Once I rectified this mistake, I removed some material for the battery pack to sit into, and this actually went well. The sensor's housing was too big to fit the design, so I just got rid of the excess while keeping the back part that already has some adhesion tape. The rest is the same story as for the battery pack. With a bit of super glue, I soaked the surface to allow for better adhesion of the sensor to the MDF. For the DC sockets, I drilled a hole through the plank and a slightly larger hole almost through for the collar to latch behind. This way it's nice and hidden in the housing. With a miter saw, I cut the plywood dividing wall to the correct shape and also made a hole for the cables to pass through. Now I could assemble the housing using painter's tape and wood glue. To build the driver mounts, I used plywood for extra strength. Being the shabby woodworker that I am, I wasn't able to build a perfectly shaped housing for the end caps to fit into. To copy the exact shape onto a piece of MDF, I tried to use double-sided tape, but that didn't really go as planned. Then I glued a piece of paper onto the edge and marked the edges using a metal cutter. I could now use this as my stencil to cut out the end cap. Because the driver mounts will stay visible through the mesh, I use some black spray paint so that everything matches perfectly. With the housing out of the way, I could now prepare all the cables for the installation of the electronics. I added the connectors and installed the cables that go through the dividing wall. For airtightness, I closed the opening in this wall using some liquid silicone, but I reckon that some hot glue or an old chewing gum would do the trick as well. After installing the DC plug and the sensor, I connected the rest of the wires and placed all components into the housing. On the side where I still need access to the electronics, I made the fitting really tight to prevent having any gaps. On the other side, where I don't need access, I just used some wood glue to fill in the gaps to prevent all air leaks. Before applying the black lacquer paint, I sanded the housing and closed up the end grain of the MDF with some liquefied wood glue, as this helps to get a better end result on these edges. I also make sure to sand everything in between layers, as it improves adhesion of the paint. In total, I applied 2 layers because I didn't feel like adding a third one. Once my cubistic rings were dried, I could work on the mesh. I just used some brass rods, a plastic spacer and some super glue to put everything together like so. With that out of the way, I only had to work on the last detail, which is to indicate the location of the switch. The initial idea was to work with brass inlays, but I was too afraid to mess up the housing when carving out the cavity. So this chicken shit wannabe woodworker just went for a brass-like marker instead. I hope this build inspired you to make your own design, and as always, I would love to read in the comments what you think about it.